Welcome back to another thrilling episode of the Dylbozer's Den. Today I will be digging into a great record. It is the sophomore release from Windsor, California's own Laceration, I Erode. This is their first release with 20 Buck Spin, who has already become one of, if not the best underground label within the last 10 to 15 years, putting out a multitude of varying and different artists. I generally will give anything a listen that label puts out, as it has just become a reliable source of some of the best underground and extreme metal out there. Upon hearing the singles that dropped for this record, I was surprised. The production was different. It was more modern sounding. The production seemed maybe akin to the most recent Atrabilis album, with how clean and clear and crisp it sounded. But it didn't sound fake. It didn't sound sterile. Anyway, we'll get into that side of things. Laceration has been around since 2006. That is almost 20 years. They have released varying demos, EPs, singles throughout that time period, but they have only had 2 full-length releases, one being 2021's Demise, put out through Rotted Life Records. And since then, they've released a single, and then they've released this album. Finally, it sounds like a band that's been around and played a lot together. It sounds like, a really tight effort. They put a lot of time and effort into their songwriting. But let's get into this lineup a little bit. You have Luke Cazares on vocals and guitar. He is the lone remaining original member. Joining him is Aaron Johnson on drums, Donnie Small on lead guitar, and Eli Small on bass. I don't know for sure. Hopefully I can find out in the coming weeks, but I believe those two are siblings and or related in some form or fashion. Just call it a hunch. We have a bona fide legend on the recording and producing side, that being Matt Harvey of Exhumed, Gruesome, Pounder, Scarecrow, you name it, multiple bands. Hell, I believe he did time in Repulsion. The man has a lineage, and the man knows songwriting, and the man knows how bands should sound. He is also the owner of Dark Corner Studios, based out of San Luis Obispo, California. He has worked with, obviously, Exhumed, Cartilage, and he's worked with Laceration at this point. I believe Dark Corner Studio also does screen printing for certain bands as well, and it also works out to be Exhumed's practice spot. You have a death metal / grind legend tied up in the producer's chair, but in the mixing and mastering seat, you also have, again, another death metal luminary. You have Greg Wilkinson of Autopsy fame in the mixing and mastering. Greg has done a lot of records by a lot of bands that I really enjoy, such as Autopsy, High on Fire, Outer Heaven. He is the co-founder, owner, and operator of Earhammer Studios, based out of Oakland, California. We've got a hell of a lineup with the band. You have a great back end of it. Let's talk about that artwork. With it sitting right here next to me, it is a great piece of art. The greens and yellows just jump off of the album cover on this, and it really adds to the overall listening experience of this, which goes along with every great piece of album art. Every time I listen to a record, I look at the artwork and I listen to it and I hone it in. The band chose a really great artist to represent the material that they had, that being James Bosema. He's worked with such artists as Frozen Soul on their Glacial Domination album. He's worked with Municipal Waste on their Electrified Brain album. He's also worked with Soulfly and Totem. And James has also finally worked with the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders, the LA Raiders. I don't fucking know football, but I know it's a football team. Great artist that has a great catalog of work that he's done to show the band that he knows what he's doing when it comes to representing this type of extreme music. Let's dig into the important aspect of this record, which is the instrumentation and the riffs upon riffs upon riffs on this record. Death metal, as we know, is known for many things, be it the guttural vocals, the insane technicality of the musicianship, drums, guitars, bass, otherwise, the quick pacing of the songs, the negative nature of what the music is. Sometimes it's gore, sometimes it's outer space, sometimes it's aliens, sometimes it's the horrors of the natural world like this album. But when we think of death metal records, at least to me, it's the riffs. It's all about the riffs. And this album is loaded with them. So being able to just pick out a couple of them and talk about them always proves to be difficult, but this band just has great riffs all over this record. And a lot of them sound very reminiscent of the early 90s Florida death metal bands, right? It sounds like bands like Deicide, sounds like Suffocation, sounds like Cannibal Corpse, just to name a few. But in particular, like on a track like Excised, at the intro riff and the riff at about 8 seconds in, it definitely gave me some early Deicide vibes there with this kind of groove and pounding and driving rhythm that it has. And then you go to Sadistic Enthrallment. There's riffs all over that song, but the one that really stuck out to me was at 2 minutes and 13 seconds in. And it just feels and sounds like old early Suffocation, or any Suffocation for that matter. Terrence Hobbs is a fucking god, and Luke and Donnie have just done wonders with like internalizing their influences and writing things that sound good to them. It sounds like a newer band doing their influences a justice and not attempting to sound just like their influences. They're filtering their influences as opposed to writing riffs that just sound like their influences. It's just different enough, but it still sounds familiar to what we're all used to hearing. And then you've got a track like Vile Incarnate. On that track, you have a blending of different influences, but we're going to kind of describe the first ones that jumped off the page for me with the riff at 1 minute and 37 seconds in. It sounds like the Bleeding era Cannibal Corpse to me. Just that weird, like eerie kind of tremolo pick notes that the band is known for during that era, and this band does it really justice. While I kind of discussed in length about the early 90s influences this band has, what doesn't need to get glossed over is the fact that this band is based out of California, and California has a great lush history of technical death metal, especially in the early 2000s with bands like Severed Savior, Deeds of Flesh, Decrepit Birth, Deprecated, Disgorge. I could keep going. This band definitely wears those influences on its sleeve as well. Like I mentioned with Vile Incarnate having the Cannibal Corpse style riffs, there's also riffs on there at like 3 minutes and 19 seconds in that sound like this Cali death sound. Shout out to the Cali Death podcast if you have any interest in diving down into the technical death metal bands or the brutal death metal bands from California. Definitely give that podcast a listen. It's fantastic. They have great interviews on there. I owe those guys a lot with getting into a lot of these technical death metal bands throughout the years. Again, another track that shows this technical death metal influence would be Carcerality, which feels to me to be the oldest track on the record. It seems the most played. It definitely has the feelings that they could play this song, upside down, eyes closed, heads twisted around backwards, that sort of thing. But that whole track kind of feels like an ode to those early 2000s technical death metal bands. It just feels like they could hold their own with that. I mean, it's lightning quick. The riffs in it just sound like that era of bands. We've got riffs. We've hit that. We've discussed some fantastic riffs that are on this record. But let's get into another aspect of guitars that we all love, right? Which is the guitar solo. Donnie Small is a fantastic, fantastic player. He has a great feel for melody, and you get a lot of that throughout this record on all the different solos. My opinion on solos is a little skewed. I'm not the biggest fan of guitar solos. Sometimes I think they're just there for the sake of being there. I don't think they get used the way a lot of people want them to be used for, which it should enhance a song. Think of it like a another verse or another chorus or a melody line or something. Solos should be memorable. I'm not saying all solos have to be that way. I'm not saying that solos can't be there for just the sake of doing them, but that's just my opinion on this, Donnie plays the type of guitar solos that I like. I would kind of compare him to like a Brandon Ellis from the Black Dahlia Murder. He has a lot of tonal choices and a lot of vibes to his playing that make me think of Brandon's playing on the more recent Black Dahlia Murder records. But let's just get into a couple of these solos that I chose that were some of my favorite. Excised has a great, memorable, hummable, catchy solo in it. Vile Incarnate, Strangled by Hatred, the title track, I Erode. I Erode is where I really heard those Black Dahlia Murder influences there. And I would assume that Donnie's influences aren't just technical death metal and extreme music and all that. I'm sure there's some classic rock influences there, but the solos are memorable, they're catchy, they're hummable, they serve a purpose in these songs. One thing I didn't want to gloss over is, like a lot of earlier death metal records, there was always kind of an instrumental track that would either start the albums out or maybe end the albums. There is an instrumental track on this record called Dreams of the Formless that makes me think of Beneath the Remains, the opening of Beneath the Remains by Sepultura. And Luke plays the solo on that. And he does a great job. It's this very melodic solo with a lot of feel. I didn't want to gloss over that, but I believe that's the only solo on the record not done by Donnie. Let's get into the drums and bass on this record. I'll start with the bass. Eli does a great job on this record. You can hear every single thing he plays. You can feel everything he plays. The bass is holding the fundamental. While he may not be the flashiest player in the world, he's not playing like tapped lines. He's not popping and slapping. He's not doing all these lead licks on there or stepping out of place. Everything he plays makes sense. Everything he plays holds the fort down. He is supporting the band. He is locking the drums in with the guitars. He is playing the fundamental. With being a bass player myself, I really enjoy seeing bass players step out of their comfort zone and play different things. But every so often, I love putting on a record and just hearing somebody play fucking bass. And Eli does a great job of that. So congratulations to him. And you can also hear him all over this record. Aaron Johnson, the drums. What can I fucking say about this? Aaron Johnson is a fantastic drummer. Drums and death metal go hand in hand with the riffs and the vocals. It's probably the most athletic part of this music. Those guys are running a marathon when they play a set. They're running a marathon when they record an album. Aaron has done some things on this record that really jumped out to me. Let's look at the track Sadistic Enthrallment. There's some drum fills in there that are absolutely mind-blowing. And then the overall performance on that song is just tight. It's intense. It's pounding, whatever superlative you want to give to that. You look at a track like Vile Incarnate, and the fills at the 25-second mark are absolutely insane. They're absolutely insane and just had me cackling with how cool they were. The guy knows his way to make something catchy and memorable as well. Then we look at the fastest and shortest track on the record, Impaling Sorrow. The intro fill just kicks right into the speedy, just hammered fucking song. And I heard that and I went, God, he sounds like John Rice. John Rice is now with Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats, but he's been with the Red Chord. He's been with Job for a Cowboy, which is where I know him for. And the intro fill on this makes me think of Job for a Cowboy's track from Ruined Nation, Unfurling a Darkened Gospel. thinking that he might be influenced by John is a really great thing because he's an underrated drummer. So we've talked about the really important stuff on here. Let's talk about what makes this record sound good. I mentioned that you got two heavyweights in the producer's chair and the mixing and mastering chair. With Matt Harvey's production on this, it feels like he got the best vibe from this band that he could. It doesn't sound overproduced. It doesn't feel like he had to go through and edit things. It sounds and feels like he got the most natural performance from them as he could, like they were performing a show. I believe the band just went in, plugged into a couple heads, and recorded it that way. I mean, everything sounds natural. The story around Matt producing this record is the band went to a show in hopes of possibly seeing Matt and hanging out, and Matt saw the band and wanted to produce their next record. So he offered to produce this album, and it's probably due to the fact that he knows what he's talking about. He knows what he hears, he knows what he's seeing, and he knows how to make a band sound really good. And he saw a band that he could give them the best representation of what they sounded like. Matt's productions just get better with each one he does. I think this might be his best production yet. But the real MVP on this record to me is Greg Wilkinson's mixing and mastering job. Everything sounds crisp, clean, clear, without it just sounding digital, without it sounding sterile. You hear every single instrument on here. The solos are not over the top. The solos are mixed well. The guitars are crunchy and pummeling. The drums are not drowning everything else out. You can hear every single drum hit on there. You can hear every single fill. The bass is cutting through. It does this great ringy kind of quality like a lot of the early death metal records and even some of the later thrash records did. Mixing a bass when it comes to all of these death metal records where everything's tuned low or there's layers and all of this different stuff going on is really hard. He's done a lot of records I love and they get better with each time. Greg's going to be a force to reckon with within the next couple of years. I think his hands are going to be all over a lot of really major records, and this one is no different. Again, on the production side, though, I don't want to gloss over the two samples that are on this album. You have a sample on Sadistic Enthrallment that is from the first Hellraiser movie. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time, so that excited me. And then you have a sample on Strangled by Hatred, the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski. I became familiar with the Iceman based off of my fanaticism of late 90s wrestling. That is the influence for Stone Cold Steve Austin to basically model his character after in the early years from like the 97 to 98 era. As you know, he was a hitman for the mob. Dangerous, dangerous man. All in all, this record is fantastic. It's been really nice to review something that was just a straightforward meat and potatoes death metal record. I've done a lot of stuff that, falls into the atmospheric realm, blackened realm, brutal realm, technical realm, you name it. But just reviewing a death metal record that feels like an old school album without sounding like an old school album. It's using modern production. The band is using their influences to create the riffs that they want to hear and they want to play. It doesn't sound like a band wanting to sound like the old school stuff and putting a glass ceiling on them and becoming just another traditional death metal band. These guys write really good shit. The riffs are really good. The production quality is fantastic. The songwriting is really good. The vocals are fantastic. The lyrical content is great. This is a great, straightforward record. I needed something like this. I hope to see this band. I hope they tour near me. Laceration, I Erode, fantastic album. Check us out on the Riff Worship podcast that drops every Wednesday. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Facebook. Thank you guys so much for watching. If there's anything you'd like me to review, if you want to add anything to this that maybe I missed, let me know. Let us know. If not, I'll check you guys later.